You are replacing me because you think I'm outdated? That may be the most expensive decision this company has ever made. Caleb Whitmore stood quietly in the center of the glass conference room as the words left his mouth, not with anger, not with pride, but with the calm certainty of a man who had spent his life learning that the loudest voice in the room was rarely the strongest one. The executives around the polished mahogany table exchanged uneasy glances. Outside the windows, the city lights of Seattle shimmered against the evening sky, reflecting off the walls of Apex Meridian Systems, one of the fastest-growing technology companies in America. At the head of the table, CEO Lauren Whitaker looked through the digital report on her tablet and folded her hands. "Caleb, this company moves forward every day," she said. "Your methods were impressive years ago, but cybersecurity has changed. We need people who understand where the future is going." 3 short sentences. 3 quiet cuts. And the room waited for him to fight back. But Caleb did not raise his voice. He did not defend his years of experience. He simply looked down at the employee badge he had carried for 5 years and slowly removed it from his jacket. The badge was small, ordinary, almost meaningless to everyone watching. They did not know how many sleepless nights stood behind it. They did not know the classified rooms, the national security meetings, or the years he spent protecting systems most people never knew existed. To them, Caleb Whitmore was just a cybersecurity specialist who preferred old methods. A man who trusted careful analysis over trendy shortcuts. A single father who arrived early, left quietly, and never asked anyone to notice him. "I hope the new team succeeds," Caleb finally said. Lauren paused, almost surprised by his response. "That's it?" she asked. "You're not going to argue?" Caleb gave a small nod. Sometimes people have to see the truth in their own time. The conference room became strangely silent. The kind of silence that arrives before a storm, when everyone feels something they cannot yet explain. Caleb picked up his worn leather briefcase and walked toward the door. Nobody stopped him. Nobody knew they had just dismissed a man whose knowledge had once protected millions of digital lives. Nobody knew that the quiet father leaving their building was not walking away because he had lost. He was walking away because he had learned that dignity did not need permission. That evening, Caleb returned to the small house he shared with his 10-year-old daughter, Emily. The smell of homemade dinner filled the kitchen as she looked up from the table. "Did work go okay, Dad?" she asked. Caleb placed his keys down and smiled gently. "It was a difficult day, sweetheart. But difficult days don't decide who we are." Emily studied his face, sensing there was more he was not saying. Caleb looked out the window at the fading sunset, unaware that somewhere far away, an old security alert had just been activated. A name buried in forgotten records had appeared on a federal system once again. Caleb Whitmore. Former Cyber Command Officer. And within hours, the world that ignored him would remember exactly who he was. If this story has you hooked, take a second to subscribe. It really helps the channel. Also, are you Team CEO or Team Single Dad? Let me know in the comments. Now, back to the story. The next morning, Caleb Whitmore woke before the sun reached the windows of his small home outside Seattle. The old alarm clock on his nightstand showed 5:15 a.m., the same time it had shown for years. Some habits were not built from routine alone. Some were built from responsibility. In the quiet kitchen, Caleb prepared coffee while packing a simple lunch for his daughter, Emily. The sound of the toaster clicking and the soft hum of the refrigerator filled the room. It was an ordinary morning, but Caleb had always learned that ordinary moments were often where the most important things happened. "Dad, are you still going to pick me up after school?" Emily asked as she walked in carrying her backpack. Caleb turned and smiled. "Every day. That is one promise I never break." She smiled back, but her eyes stayed on him for a moment longer. Children often notice the things adults try to hide. She knew something had changed. Caleb sat beside her and adjusted the strap on her backpack. Sometimes people make decisions without knowing the whole story, he said softly. That does not mean we stop being kind. Those words were not just advice for Emily. They were the same words Caleb had lived by for years. After dropping her off at school, he drove his older Ford pickup through the morning traffic. The city moved quickly around him, people rushing toward meetings, deadlines, and opportunities. Caleb watched it all quietly. He had spent years working in a world where information moved faster than people could understand, but he had learned something important. Speed was not the same as wisdom. Back at home later that afternoon, Caleb opened his laptop. He was not looking for revenge. He was not trying to prove anyone wrong. He simply wanted to understand the strange feeling that had followed him since leaving Apex Meridian Systems. Something about the company's new security system had bothered him for weeks. Not because he wanted recognition, but because he knew the warning signs. He remembered late nights years earlier, studying patterns most people ignored. He remembered teaching younger analysts that the smallest details often revealed the biggest problems. His phone suddenly vibrated. The screen showed an unknown secure number. Caleb stared at it for several seconds. He had not seen that type of communication in years. He answered calmly. Whitmore speaking. A voice responded from the other end. Caleb, this is Marcus Bell. I hope I am not interrupting your evening. Caleb stood still. He recognized the name immediately. It has been a long time, Marcus. The room became quiet. Outside, rain tapped gently against the window. Marcus lowered his voice. Your clearance records were reviewed today. Something unusual happened. Your old credentials were activated. Caleb looked toward the family photo on the shelf. A picture of Emily smiling beside him during a summer trip years before. I am not part of that world anymore, Caleb said. Marcus paused. Maybe you are not looking for that world, Caleb. But sometimes the world still needs people who know how to protect it. Caleb said nothing. For years, he had chosen a quiet life. A life of school pickups, simple dinners, and being there for his daughter. He did not miss the attention or the responsibility that came with his former career. But deep inside, he knew one truth. A person does not lose who they are just because they stop wearing the title. And somewhere inside the systems he once protected, a forgotten question had started to appear. Who was the man behind the name Caleb Whitmore? The days after Caleb Whitmore left Apex Meridian Systems moved faster than anyone expected. Inside the company headquarters, the atmosphere changed from confidence to uncertainty. The executives who once believed every problem could be solved with newer technology and faster systems began noticing small signs they could not explain. Reports loaded slower. Security checks required more attention. Employees received unusual alerts that appeared and disappeared before anyone could understand them. At first, Lauren Whitaker dismissed the concerns. She stood in her office high above the city, looking through the glass walls that represented everything she had built. Every company experiences adjustments, she told her leadership team. We hired a younger security group for a reason. Progress requires change. Her words sounded confident, but even she could feel something was missing. Across the room, her new cybersecurity director reviewed reports with a team of engineers. They were talented, educated, and familiar with the latest tools. But there was one problem they could not solve. They were looking at the system from the outside. They did not understand the history written inside it. Meanwhile, Caleb spent his mornings doing what mattered most to him. He walked Emily to the bus stop, helped her with homework, and cooked dinner in their small kitchen. To the world, he was simply a father trying to move forward. But every evening, after Emily went to sleep, Caleb sat quietly at his desk. He never searched for recognition. He never looked for a way back into the spotlight. He only watched. He studied. He listened. Because experience had taught him that the most dangerous problems were often the ones people refused to see. 1. Evening, Marcus Bell called again. Caleb, I need you to look at something, Marcus said. Caleb hesitated. I am not an active officer anymore. Marcus answered calmly, that is not why I am calling. I am calling because you are still the person who understands this better than anyone. Caleb opened the encrypted file Marcus sent. His expression changed slightly as he reviewed the information. The patterns were familiar. Too familiar. He remembered designing defensive strategies years ago, not because he wanted recognition, but because protecting people mattered. There is a weakness, Caleb finally said. Marcus became quiet. Can it be fixed? Caleb looked at the screen, then toward the hallway where Emily's bedroom light was still on. Yes. But they need to understand what they are dealing with. Back at Apex Meridian Systems, Lauren received another briefing from her team. The room that once celebrated quick decisions was now filled with uncomfortable silence. We need more time, one engineer admitted. Lauren looked at the reports in front of her. For the first time, she thought about the man she had dismissed. Not the employee. Not the specialist. The person. The father who never raised his voice. The professional who accepted her decision with dignity. She remembered his final words. Sometimes people have to see the truth in their own time. Outside the building, the city lights reflected across the glass. No one inside knew that the truth was already moving closer. And when it arrived, it would not come with an argument. It would come with silence. The morning after Lauren Whitaker realized something was wrong, she arrived at Apex Meridian Systems earlier than usual. The city was still waking beneath the pale gray sky, and the quiet halls of the headquarters felt different. For years, the building had represented confidence, innovation, and control. But now, behind the polished glass and modern designs, there was a feeling nobody wanted to admit. Something was missing. Lauren walked into the cybersecurity operations room where her team had gathered around several screens. The room that once carried excitement now carried uncertainty. We have reviewed the system architecture, one engineer explained. The newer upgrades are functioning, but there are areas we do not fully understand. Lauren looked at the reports. Areas we do not understand, she repeated. The engineer hesitated. The original framework was designed differently. Whoever built the foundation thought several steps ahead. 3 short sentences. 3 uncomfortable truths. Lauren slowly looked at the screen again. She remembered Caleb Whitmore sitting across from her days earlier. She remembered his calm expression when she called his work outdated. At the time, she believed confidence came from knowing when to replace the past. Now she wondered if wisdom came from knowing when to respect it. Across town, Caleb sat at his kitchen table with a cup of coffee beside his laptop. He was not celebrating. He was not waiting for an apology. His attention remained on the information Marcus Bell had provided. You saw something, Marcus said during their call. Caleb nodded slightly. The foundation is older than the current team realizes. It was built with a different philosophy. Marcus asked, meaning? Caleb looked at the screen. Meaning the person who designed it understood that technology changes, but human mistakes do not. There was a pause. Marcus smiled faintly. You always did explain complicated things simply. Caleb looked toward the hallway where Emily was getting ready for school. That is because complicated things affect ordinary people. Someone always pays attention to the numbers. Someone should also remember the people behind them. At Apex Meridian Systems, Lauren began searching through old employee records. She did not know exactly what she was looking for. Maybe an explanation. Maybe proof that her decision had been correct. But the deeper she looked, the more questions appeared. Caleb Whitmore was not simply a cybersecurity specialist with years of experience. His history contained gaps. Important gaps. Years that were carefully documented but rarely discussed. Then she found an archived reference connected to his name. A security clearance record. A federal authorization. A role that did not match the quiet man who carried a worn leather briefcase and drove an old pickup truck. Lauren leaned closer to the screen. For the first time, she saw Caleb differently. Not as an employee who refused to change. Not as someone behind the times. But as someone who had already been standing at the edge of the future before others even noticed it was coming. Outside her office window, the city continued moving. Cars passed. People walked. The world remained unaware of what was unfolding inside Apex Meridian Systems. But one truth had begun to rise above everything else. The man they underestimated was the man everyone would soon need. The following morning, the atmosphere inside Apex Meridian Systems felt heavier than anyone wanted to admit. The employees moved through the halls carrying coffee cups and quiet conversations, but beneath the normal rhythm of the company was a growing uncertainty. People who once believed every problem could be solved with a new update, a new platform, or a younger team were beginning to understand something deeper. Experience was not the opposite of progress. Sometimes, experience was the reason progress survived. Lauren Whitaker stood alone in her office, reviewing the archived records connected to Caleb Whitmore. The information on the screen felt impossible to match with the man she had known. The quiet specialist who arrived early. The father who always left on time to pick up his daughter. The employee who never competed for attention. "Who were you, Caleb?" she whispered. A few floors below, her cybersecurity team continued searching for answers. Their frustration was not because they lacked intelligence. They were skilled professionals. But they were trying to understand a system created by someone who thought differently. Someone who understood that technology was not only about machines. It was about responsibility. Lauren entered the operations room and looked at the team. "Have we found the original designer of the security framework?" she asked. The room became quiet. One engineer looked down at his notes. "We found a name attached to the earliest architecture files." Lauren waited. "Caleb Whitmore." The words landed differently this time. Not as a former employee. Not as someone she had dismissed. But as someone whose work had been quietly holding everything together. Meanwhile, Caleb sat at home helping Emily prepare a science project for school. A small model sat on the kitchen table, surrounded by colored paper, pencils, and a few scattered notes. "Dad, how do you know so much about complicated things?" Emily asked. Caleb smiled while helping her organize the project. "Because I spent a lot of years learning that knowledge means nothing if you do not use it to help people." She looked at him thoughtfully. "Do people at work know that?" Caleb paused for a moment. Then he answered gently. "Sometimes people only see what is in front of them." That evening, Marcus Bell called again. His voice sounded more serious than before. "Caleb, we need to talk." Caleb stepped outside onto the porch. The evening air was cool, and the neighborhood was quiet. "What happened?" he asked. Marcus took a breath. "Your former company is facing a situation connected to the system you designed years ago. The wrong people underestimated the foundation. They replaced knowledge with assumptions." Caleb looked toward the streetlights glowing in the distance. "Is anyone in danger?" he asked. "Not if we act quickly," Marcus replied. Caleb closed his eyes for a moment. He remembered the promise he made to himself years ago. A quieter life. More time with his daughter. A chance to be just a father. But some responsibilities never truly disappear. They simply wait. Back at Apex Meridian Systems, Lauren received a message marked with a federal security classification. Her hand stopped moving as she opened it. The first line was simple. The kind of sentence that changes how people see the past. Caleb Whitmore is not an ordinary cybersecurity specialist. Outside the building, the evening sky darkened over the city. And somewhere beyond the clouds, her response was already beginning to move toward the company that had forgotten the value of the man they let go. The night after Lauren Whitaker received the classified message, she remained in her office long after the last employees had left Apex Meridian Systems. The city lights outside her window reflected against the glass, but for the first time in years, the view did not make her feel in control. It reminded her of something she had forgotten. That every person inside her company carried a story she did not know. On her desk was the file connected to Caleb Whitmore. She opened it again, slowly reading every detail. Former Cyber Command Officer. Advanced Security Architect. National Protection Specialist. The words felt distant from the man she remembered. The man who quietly drank coffee in the break room. The man who helped younger employees without expecting recognition. The man she described as behind the times. Lauren leaned back in her chair and whispered, "I judged the person before understanding the purpose." Across town, Caleb stood in his kitchen preparing a simple dinner with Emily. The warmth of the house was different from the cold brightness of corporate offices. Here, nobody cared about titles. Nobody cared about achievements. He was simply Dad. "Are you going back to work?" Emily asked while placing plates on the table. Caleb smiled softly. "I do not know yet." She looked curious. "You always tell me to help people when they need you." Caleb looked at his daughter and felt the weight of those words. Children often see the truth adults ignore. "You are right," he said. "Sometimes we have to remember why we learned something in the first place." Later that evening, Marcus Bell arrived at Caleb's home. The two men sat on the porch beneath the quiet night sky. There was no ceremony. No dramatic announcement. Just two people who understood the responsibility behind a promise. "The situation is changing quickly," Marcus said. "Your old work is connected to the foundation of their system. They need someone who understands every layer." Caleb looked toward the street where a few houses glowed with warm lights. "I left that life for a reason." Marcus nodded. "I know. You wanted to be there for Emily. You wanted a normal life." A quiet pause followed. The kind of silence that carried years of memories. "But being a father never meant you stopped being who you are," Marcus said. Caleb looked down at his hands. Hands that had fixed broken systems. Written solutions, and carried responsibilities most people never knew existed. He did not miss the attention. He did not miss the pressure. But he understood something important. Purpose does not disappear when a person chooses a quieter path. The next morning, Lauren entered the executive conference room where her leadership team waited. Everyone could feel the seriousness in the room. "We need to contact Caleb Whitmore," she said. One executive looked surprised. "After the termination decision?" Lauren looked at him calmly. "After my mistake." Before anyone could respond, a sound interrupted the meeting. A deep, distant vibration moved through the building. Employees near the windows looked outside. The sky above the city had changed. 3 military helicopters appeared in the distance, moving steadily toward the area around Apex Meridian Systems. Conversations stopped. Phones lowered. The entire building seemed to hold its breath. Lauren walked toward the window, watching in silence. She did not know what was happening yet. She only knew one thing. The man she thought she had removed from her company had never truly been ordinary. And the world was about to remind everyone exactly who Caleb Whitmore was. The sound of the helicopters became the only thing anyone noticed inside Apex Meridian Systems. Employees gathered near the windows, watching the sky above the building with confusion and curiosity. The same company that once celebrated speed, innovation, and control now stood completely still. No one had an explanation. No one had an answer. Lauren Whitaker remained near the glass, her eyes fixed on the approaching aircraft. For the first time since becoming CEO, she felt the limits of her own understanding. A few minutes later, the main entrance doors opened. A man in a dark suit walked into the lobby with a calm expression and a federal identification badge. His name was Marcus Bell. The conversations around him faded. He looked across the room and asked a simple question. Who authorized the dismissal of Caleb Whitmore? The words traveled through the lobby like a wave. Nobody answered immediately. The employees looked at one another. The executives who had approved the decision suddenly found themselves unable to explain it. Lauren stepped forward. I did, she said quietly. Marcus looked at her, not with anger, but with disappointment. Then I believe there are some things you need to understand. He opened a secure folder and placed it on the reception desk. Inside were records that revealed the truth about the man they had removed. Caleb Whitmore had not been behind the times. He had been ahead of them. Years earlier, before becoming a father and choosing a quieter life, Caleb had helped design security systems used to protect important networks. His knowledge was not based on trends. It was built on years of responsibility, patience, and understanding. The room became silent. The kind of silence where people finally hear what they ignored before. Lauren looked down at the documents. Every page changed the way she remembered that conference room. She remembered calling his methods outdated. She remembered assuming his quiet nature meant he lacked ambition. But now she understood something she had missed. Caleb was never trying to impress anyone. He was simply doing the work. Marcus closed the folder. Mr. Whitmore stepped away from that role because he wanted a different life. He wanted to raise his daughter. He wanted peace. Lauren looked toward the windows again. The city continued moving below them, unaware of the moment unfolding inside the building. Why did he not tell us? One executive asked. Marcus answered calmly. Because people with true confidence rarely need to announce who they are. Meanwhile, Caleb sat at his kitchen table with Emily, helping her finish her school project. His phone rested nearby, but he had not touched it. He did not know what was happening at Apex Meridian Systems. He did not know that people who once overlooked him were finally seeing the truth. All he knew was that his daughter was laughing, dinner was waiting, and life had become peaceful. Then his phone began to ring. Caleb looked at the screen. Marcus Bell. He answered quietly. I assume things have changed. Marcus paused. They have. They know now. Caleb looked out the window at the evening sky. And what do they need? Marcus replied, they need the person they should have respected from the beginning. Caleb closed his eyes for a moment. He knew this was never about proving anyone wrong. It was about helping when help was needed. Slowly, he stood from the table. Behind him, Emily looked up. Are you leaving, Dad? Caleb smiled gently. Only for a little while. And as he walked toward the door, the quiet man everyone underestimated prepared to return, not for recognition, not for revenge, but because sometimes the people who protect others are the ones who never ask to be seen. Caleb Whitmore arrived at Apex Meridian Systems just before sunrise. The city was still quiet, the streets covered in the soft gray light of early morning. For a moment, he sat inside his old Ford pickup and looked at the building in front of him. Months earlier, he had walked out of those doors carrying nothing but his briefcase and his dignity. Today, he returned carrying something different. Not pride. Not anger. Responsibility. Inside the building, employees watched as Caleb entered the lobby. Some recognized him immediately. Others whispered quietly, trying to understand why the man they had forgotten was now being welcomed by federal officials. Caleb did not look around for approval. He simply nodded politely and continued forward. Marcus Bell met him near the security entrance. I know this is not easy, Marcus said. Caleb adjusted his jacket and replied, it is not about easy. It is about doing what needs to be done. Those words reminded Marcus why Caleb had always been different. He never chased recognition. He never needed a room to know his value. In the Emergency Operations Center, Lauren Whitaker waited. The confident CEO who once controlled every decision now stood quietly, unsure how to begin. When Caleb entered, their eyes met. A long silence filled the room. Lauren was the first to speak. "Caleb, I owe you an apology." Caleb listened without interrupting. "I judged your experience before understanding your purpose," she continued. "I thought moving forward meant leaving people like you behind." Caleb looked at the security screens displaying the company's systems. "The future is not built by forgetting the past," he said calmly. "It is built by learning from it." The room became silent again. Not an uncomfortable silence. A respectful one. The kind that appears when people finally recognize something they should have seen earlier. Caleb moved toward the main workstation and reviewed the information. The younger engineers stepped aside, watching carefully. They expected someone arrogant. Someone who would remind them of his history. Instead, they saw a man who asked questions, listened, and treated everyone with respect. "Show me what you know," Caleb said. "Then I will show you what I see." For the next several hours, the room transformed. It was no longer about old methods versus new methods. It was about combining knowledge with innovation. Caleb studied the patterns, reviewed the system design, and noticed details others had overlooked. Not because he was better than them. Because he had spent years understanding how small choices affected millions of people. Lauren watched from across the room. She noticed something unexpected. The man she once considered outdated was not stuck in the past. He was the bridge between experience and the future. At noon, Marcus received confirmation that the situation was stabilizing. The tension inside the building began to disappear. Employees who had once ignored Caleb now watched him with a different kind of respect. But Caleb remained the same. When the work was complete, he did not celebrate. He simply closed the laptop and checked the time. Lauren noticed. "You are leaving?" she asked. Caleb smiled slightly. "My daughter gets out of school soon." For a moment, Lauren understood everything. The most impressive thing about Caleb Whitmore was not the knowledge he carried. It was the life he chose to protect. He had the ability to stand in powerful rooms, but he valued being there for one little girl even more. And in that moment, everyone inside Apex Meridian Systems understood the truth. Real strength does not demand attention. It quietly earns respect. The days that followed changed Apex Meridian Systems in a way no quarterly report could measure. The company still had meetings, deadlines, and ambitious goals, but something had shifted beneath the surface. People began looking at each other differently. They listened more carefully. They asked better questions. Because they had learned a lesson that no technology could replace. Knowledge without humility was incomplete. 1 week after Caleb Whitmore returned, Lauren Whitaker stood before the entire company during a morning meeting. Hundreds of employees gathered in the main auditorium, waiting to hear what their CEO would say. The atmosphere was different from the confident presentations they were used to. There was no celebration of success. No display of power. Only honesty. Lauren stepped toward the microphone and looked across the room. "A few weeks ago, I made a decision based on assumptions instead of understanding," she said. The room became quiet. "I believed progress meant replacing experience with something newer. I was wrong." Many employees glanced toward Caleb, who stood near the back of the room. He did not stand in the center. He did not ask for attention. That was never who he was. Lauren continued. Caleb Whitmore reminded us that true innovation does not come from ignoring the people who came before us. It comes from respecting the knowledge they bring. The applause that followed was not loud because people were trying to impress anyone. It was meaningful because it was genuine. Caleb simply nodded. Later that afternoon, Caleb sat with Lauren in her office. The same room where she once made the decision that changed everything. But now the atmosphere was completely different. "I want you to lead our security division," Lauren said. Caleb looked thoughtful. "I appreciate that, but I have one condition." Lauren smiled slightly. "What is it?" Caleb looked out at the city below. "I want time with my daughter. I do not want a position that takes me away from being a father." Lauren understood immediately. For years, she had measured success by titles, growth, and influence. Caleb had measured success differently. He measured it in promises kept, moments shared, and the people who depended on him. "Then we will build a role that respects that," Lauren said. Caleb smiled. "That sounds like progress." Months later, Apex Meridian Systems became known for something beyond technology. It became known for combining experience with new ideas. Young engineers learned from Caleb, not because he demanded respect, but because he gave it first. He taught them that every line of code represented real people. Every decision carried responsibility. Every person deserved to be seen. At home, Caleb returned to the same simple routine. Morning coffee. School drop-offs. Dinner with Emily. The life he fought to protect was still the life he valued most. One evening, Emily looked at him and asked, "Do people know now how special you are?" Caleb smiled as he placed a plate on the table. "That is not the important part." She tilted her head. "Then what is?" Caleb looked at his daughter and answered, "Being the kind of person you can be proud of when nobody is watching." Outside, the evening lights of Seattle quietly filled the streets. The world had finally noticed Caleb Whitmore, but he had never needed the world to notice. Because some people do not become valuable when others recognize them. They are valuable from the beginning. They simply wait for the right moment for the truth to be seen. Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell for more emotional stories like this. And before you go, what state are you watching from? Drop it in the comments below. See you in the next story.